Hello, dear organizers and participants of the conference National Medicine for Global Health. Let me present to your attention a report dedicated to a medical scientist, Vladimir Petrovich Demichov. The work was performed by first-year students of the pediatric faculty, Valeria Pavlova and Yana Shatohina. Vladimir Petrovich Demichov was a Soviet scientist and organ transplantation pioneer who performed several transplants in the 1940s and 1950s, including the transplantation of the heart into an animal and a heart-lung replacement in an animal. He is also well known for his dog hair transplants, which he conducted during the 1950s, resulting in two-headed dogs. Vladimir Petrovich Demichov was born on July 31, 1916, into a family of Russian peasants living on a small farmstead in the northern part of Russia's Volgograd region. His father, Demichov Petr Yakovlevich, was killed during the Russian Civil War. Then Demichov was about 3 years old. So he and his brother and sister were raised by their mother, Dominika Alexandrovna, who managed to provide them with a good education. He began to show an interest in the mammalian circulatory system as a teenager and is also known to have been inspired by Pavlov's experimental work with dogs. In 1934, Demichov began studying at the Voronezh State University. There, in 1937, he created the world's first artificial heart and successfully implanted it into a dog, which survived for 2 hours after the surgery. A description of this groundbreaking work was published in April 1938 in the university student newspaper, and it was presented to the other students at the scientific conference the following month. He then transferred to the biology faculty of Moscow State University. There he wrote his first scientific work and graduated with honors in August 1940. Research work of Demichov took a back seat during the Second World War. Then he was accorded the rank of lieutenant following his basic military training. He was posted in a field evacuation hospital as a pathologist. While recalling his experience of the war to his beloved daughter, Demichov mentioned that the stress of the war zone was so intense that at times soldiers would shoot themselves so as to take refuge at the hospital. As such fact was taken as a war crime and invited death punishment. He used to be consulted as a forensic expert. Although Demichov was fully aware of the consequences that he may face for his lies, he tried his level best to save lives of as many soldiers as possible by weakening the evidence that otherwise would have proved the injuries as self-inflicted. After the war, Demichov resumed his post in the Human Physiology Department at Moscow State University. There he continued his experimental research, eventually performing successful heart and lung transplants on warm-blooded animals. In 1947, he moved to the Institute of Surgery in Moscow. There he began to experiment with liver and kidney transplantation in the late 1940s. He spent the 1950s carrying out research into organ transplantation surgery, continuously improving his experimental techniques. He successfully performed an isolated off-topic heart transplantation in a dog in 1951. The heart was correctly positioned rather than offset inside the thoracic cavity. The survival rates steadily increased from a few hours to several weeks, and one of the dogs that received a heart transplant in 1953 survived for another 7 years after the operation. In February 1954, inarguably his most bizarre experiment, he transplanted a dog's heart into another dog using vascular connections to the host dog's heart. Ignoring the condemnation from his critics, he continued with this particular line of experimentation, becoming more successful with time. His transplantation work was widely reported inside the Soviet Union. There it was continuously criticized for being unethical. He was directed to stop his researches by the director of the Institute of Surgery, Alexander Vishnevsky, surgeon in charge of the Soviet Armed Forces, applied his own power to allow Demichov to continue these research works. But it was not until the late 1950s that news of his experience spread to the outside world. In fact, by the time American surgeons became aware of Demichov's dog head transplantations in 1959, he had already been performing these procedures for 5 years. Demichov coined the word transplantology, meaning organ transplantation in his 1960 monograph, Experimental Transplantation of Vital Organs, for which he received his doctoral degree. Demichov's ideas were initially met with a harsh degree of skepticism, but he maintained a calm demeanor and was able to field all questions that were thrown at him by his critics. Eager to share his ideas in finding these other medical professionals from around the world, he was always happy to welcome visitors to his laboratory to witness his experiments. U.S. physicians started to learn about his innovative techniques in the 1960s. Then many of them traveled to the Soviet Union to watch Soviet surgeons at work. By 1962, the opinion of the American medical community had shifted, and they gradually warmed to the idea of one day successfully transplanting human organs. South American cardiac surgeon Christian Barnard, who conducted Ward's first human-to-human heart transplant, considered Demichov his teacher and visited the latter's lab twice. Demichov's scientific contributions earned to him the Order of Merit for the Fatherland, 3rd class, a state decoration of the Russian Federation, and also a USSR State Prize.